So today we're going to talk about telepathy and empathy and other ways that we communicate as humans. And I invite you, if you have specific questions about this, I will at the end check the chat because because we all have very different experiences of this. Oh, thanks. I know, they're new. They're so nice. I love them too. As soon as we get discussing things that are beyond the five senses, as soon as we start beginning to talk about empathy, telepathy, any kind of clairvoyance or divine connection or anything like that, our words really fall short. And so how I describe things today may not be exactly how you experience them. Hopefully they're close, but maybe not exactly, because our words are a little limited. So it's funny actually, because I kind of think it's part of the talk we're going to have today. The world that we're living in right now, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to telepathy and empathy and emotional connection and all these kind of things. Whereas the world that I believe that if we're all here today chatting about it, we all feel that there's another reality possible, where this kind of connection is easy, and it's natural. It's natural to be telepathic. It's natural to be empathic. It's natural to just be open and not live with guards up all the time. So there's sort of these two worlds we're going to talk about today. What it's like experiencing telepathy and empathy and all these kind of things in the world we're in right now, which matters. This is it. This is where we are. This is reality. But then there's also this other possibility. And in that possibility, these abilities make so much sense. And they're so effortless. So those are sort of where we're going with this. Everything we're going to talk about today, we sort of can balance between, oh, I can see how that works there. Wow, I can see why it's so difficult here. And it's beautiful. I think it's not about saying, wow, the world sucks right now. It's more about, I'm glad we were born into this time. I'm glad everybody here today, it's obviously a soul's desire to expand on this, which is why we're here. We're here to bring the world in, bring in the world where these inherent gifts we feel inside are effortless and they really make our life beautiful. So I'm going to talk for a little while and then I'll check if you have any questions. And if you don't, that's all good too. But I will check at the end. So that's the first thing I really want to talk about, is that everything I'm going to talk about today is based on the premise that telepathy, empathy, emotional connection, real, I almost want to just call it human connection, where when we are actually fully embodied humans, fully divine, physical, open, whole humans, that these are natural. But we've come out of a very difficult time, whether you understand it as being Kali Yuga or just a very dark period of history where these kinds of gifts were shunned. You know, you didn't want to know things you shouldn't have known. Bad things would happen. And we do it right from childhood, like anything that's sort of intangible, right? As soon as we tell children that they aren't really talking to imaginary friends, we sort of delete the magic out of things if we don't understand it, and we don't mean to. You know, even in my generation, like even when my kids were little, I'm not that far out of the generation that would be like, now, don't talk about that kind of thing. That's not real, right? It's almost like we get talked out of the fact that, no, I actually do know what you're thinking. I actually do know what you're feeling. But we live in a world where it's not okay. It's not okay to feel this way. And we're going to talk about that. I think what's really beautiful about even why we're talking about this is that everybody here has had glimpses of this. We've had glimpses of telepathic communication. We've had glimpses of empathic communication. And similarly, if you were in my talk yesterday, it's sort of that process of demystifying it and remystifying it, right? That we often think of, oh, that person's telepathic. Oh, they can read my mind like a ticker tape machine. Oh no, I've got to guard my thoughts or something. Or even empaths, right? It's like, oh, I don't want you to feel what I feel, right? And in many ways, to demystify it and say, no, it's so much more natural than that. Telepathy isn't something that only telepaths can do, or telepathic telepaths. Telepaths can, I said it again. Maybe that's what we're going to call people today. Or maybe that's right. It's normal. I remember one time when I was married and my friends would come to visit because we had a farm, so everyone had to come visit us because we couldn't leave. And my friends and I would all be sitting in the living room or with my sisters or people I was really close with, that I really had that heart open, trust, love, openness with, right? Every so often my husband would come in from the barn for, a break. He would come in for a coffee and he'd sit down in the room and listen to us. He loved listening to us talk. And afterwards he'd just say to me, he called me Kat, he'd say, Kat, how come you guys never finish a sentence? He said, listening to you, I can't even follow you. Because literally one person, and yes, and we would do this thing. We had no idea we were doing it. But literally the room was so open and kind and loving, we didn't even know we were actually hearing each other's thoughts and finishing each other's sentences, to the point that if you actually listened to us for a whole hour, you wouldn't even know what the topic was. But we had no idea we were doing it. So it was kind of fun to have an external recorder or someone watching. And it's same with empathy. One of the things we'll talk a lot about today, because it's a really common topic right now, is how to be an empath in this world right now. How do we be open? If we don't want to be shut down. I think that's the big thing too. When we felt this, it's like, no, I don't want to shut this down. It's like shutting off a part of me or cutting off my arm. And yet, to walk out into the world with your heart open, feeling everything that's out there, that's pretty tough some days. I remember one day, so I often talk about my first teacher, Jim, and one of the beautiful things I learned from him was he was the first person, he was like a blank slate, right? And this is a big thing about what telepathy really is. If you imagine, if you're actually able to become a blank slate, which we'll also talk about in a bit, what happens is, here you are completely quiet inside your brain, and all of a sudden this thought, let's say you're sitting with someone, and all of a sudden this thought comes in your mind, like a fear or something. Well, you know it's not yours. We often do this empathically, but if we could actually clear our mind, which is why telepathy right now is so uncommon, because we're not that great at clearing our mind and becoming that hollow bamboo. But when we can clear our mind, which my teacher was brilliant at, I'd be sitting with him and all of a sudden he'd go, "You really think that?" Because whatever I was thinking had just literally gone across his mind. And I'd go, "What?" But there was no judgment. And that's the key. There was absolutely no judgment in what he just went, "Wow, that must be hard for you to live with every day." And what it did is it just sort of opened me up to what it was like to actually be with a teacher. And I don't mean just a teacher, I mean a teacher who actually, his only role there was to help me or to teach me. He wasn't there to judge me. He wasn't there to tell me what to do with my life. He was just there to channel whatever I needed in that moment. So I became accustomed, after that experience with him and we spent a lot of time together, I became very accustomed to this, that this is what you do around a master. This is what you do around a teacher. You just open your heart and you become this empty bowl. You just become the pure feminine student, right? That full receiver. And then I went away a few years later to study Kundalini Yoga and to become a teacher. And I was so excited because I lived in the middle of nowhere on this farm. And so there was no yoga community. There was no spiritual community. There was nothing. So if I wanted to study yoga, I had to travel for it. I had to go and immerse myself. So I'm sitting there in front of these teachers and I'm just like, okay, I'm ready. And I just opened my whole being up like, yeah, like just let's have it, right? And all of a sudden, all I kept seeing were pictures of this one teacher who was very, well, I'll say it now, guarded, and really wanted to present himself in a certain way, that he was enlightened and he was knowledgeable and he had been friends with a great teacher and all that kind of thing, right? But I wasn't really open, I wasn't worrying about that. I just thought, no, these people are my teachers. That's why I was called here. And then all of a sudden, I just kept having these visions of him falling on his bike and his dad yelling at him. And I just kept having all these visions from his childhood or something. All I knew was I just kept getting filled with sadness and more sadness and more sadness. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's going on? Because this was a long time ago. I didn't know what I was experiencing. And then but my eyes kept turning to this one teacher, because there were 3 teachers, and I kept turning to this one teacher, and I thought, it's you. It's you that is coming into my mind. And I was so disappointed that I actually had to shut down that antenna. I had to shut down that ability to just be open to what was there. But I did. I guess that's also what I learned, right? Was how to actually shut that down. And then I just learned the technology of the yoga, and I learned a million other things. I learned so many other wonderful things in the community. But I wasn't able to just open myself like that. The other thing we're going to talk about today, so we're going to talk about telepathy, we're going to talk about empathy. And this sort of blends in with all of it, because I do believe that in this ideal space where all of this is natural, I think all of these things are so blended we won't even be able to discern them. They'll almost act as a whole. But today we'll separate them. And the third one is emotional communication, which obviously comes out of empathy, but it feels a little different, so I just want to treat it a little bit differently. A couple years ago, I was in Greece, and I was chatting with a man there, and it was so cool because English was his, I don't know, 3rd or 4th language, and he was sitting there and he was telling me all about how he believed that humans were made of 2 things, mathematics and emotions. And so you can imagine, if you've heard any of my talks, I have quite a passion for mathematics. And so the idea that we were part mathematics and part emotion, and that we connected through emotion, that our actual primary communication was through our emotions. I was just like mind blown. I was like, I just want to talk to you for the next, year. And this is very interesting if you imagine this. If you imagine we came to a place of wholeness and health, that it was okay for people to feel our emotions, and that through our emotions they would know exactly where we were at, and that we could feel other people's emotions and we would know exactly where they were at. It's almost like the ultimate nonverbal communication, right? We often talk about nonverbal communication as maybe being body language or something else. But what if a huge component of it is emotions? And again, one of the challenges is in our world right now, emotions aren't okay. Anything beyond happy or gratitude is not okay. And we have to bury them. We have to quieten them. So you can imagine how distant we feel from each other. I think on a very primal level, we know this. This is why we feel so alone. Because we aren't allowed to just feel our emotions or allow them to flow or allow someone else to feel them. And we do that for all kinds of reasons. You know, sometimes we don't want to burden others. Sometimes we are uncomfortable with our own emotions, and we certainly don't want to have to deal with it with someone else. It's not all evil or anything. It's just, that's the world we live in right now, which makes emotional communication difficult. It makes being an empath difficult, and telepathy is impossible. Okay. So, there was a great book written once called Mutant Message Down Under. And it was a story of a New York journalist who went down to Australia to do a paper or do an article on the Aboriginals there. And so she's expecting to kind of be able to go down and do sort of the shallow coverage, you know, get a few weird rituals and write it up and take it back to New York, right? And so she's going through she goes all the way out into the outback, and only one guy speaks English, her guide. And eventually the guide says, okay, we'll go into that hut and put on this sort of burlap outfit and follow me. And you'll learn what you need to learn. And she was like, okay, I'll play. And she put everything down on her phone and her everything. And they took her on a 6-month walkabout. And one of the most, and this book, I mean, I must have read it 20 years ago. It was just one of those, you know, you'll read those books in those moments where you go, whoa, you know, or if you read Celestine Prophecy back in the day, you know, it's like, what? We have auras? Like, it was just mind-blowing. Today, we're like, yeah. We've been talking about this for 20 years. But at the time when I read Mutant Message Down Under, and I'm only qualifying this because, you know, sometimes you recommend a book because it blew your mind, and then someone goes and reads it today in 2021, and they're like, it's not that deep, you know, or something. And I haven't reread it in 20 years, so I don't know if it's, but at the time, absolutely blew my mind. And one of the things that's very relevant for our conversation today is they're out there walking, and there's like, I don't know, 20 or 30 people, and they're just walking, right? They're on a walkabout. And then all of a sudden, they would all just turn and just walk a different way. And then they would all just turn and they would walk a different way. And she said to her guide, she said, how do you guys all know to just turn like that? I don't understand. And he looked at her and he said, well, we're telepathic. It's a natural human ability to simply read the mind of the leader. Like, this is a natural thing. And she said, well, why can't I do it? He said, because you were raised in a society that was based on judgment. So this is the first piece I want to talk about, is judgment. He said, the number one reason that you can't read each other's minds is, one, you can't handle what you're going to find out in that other person's mind because you are so full of judgment. You're going to judge what you see or hear. And you don't want anyone to read your thoughts because you are personally judging your thoughts, and you don't want that person's judgment of your thoughts either. And this is the number one block to our very natural telepathic abilities. And this is why there's occasions that we've gotten a glimpse of with a good friend, with a lover, with someone we really trust, and we know that they won't judge us. That suddenly we start saying what the other person's thinking. And we don't necessarily have to communicate verbally because we just know. But it only happens where there's this environment of non-judgment. And this is no small thing. Like, it's easy just to say, yes, I'm just not going to be judgmental anymore, right? but it is so a part of who we are. Like it's right out of our education system even. And this isn't me dissing the education system. This is just reality as I see it. Even the idea of being graded on our abilities or graded on our thoughts, that has become part of who we are. It's like, oh, that's not a good thought. That's a good thought. That's a brilliant thought. Oh, that's no good. You don't want anyone to hear the bad thoughts, but the good thoughts, can I only project those ones? Right? It's part of what we've been brought up in. And it takes a lot of often really difficult times to break out of that judgment, to actually come to a place where there's no such thing as a bad thought or a good thought. It's just what's going through our mind. And even if you really think about thoughts, whenever we talk about in meditation how we want to clear our thoughts and get rid of all of our thoughts. And again, because we're on Insight Timer, I'm assuming everybody here's, done some meditation of various things, guided meditations, silent meditations. And there are moments when we can kind of fall into that really neutral, beautiful space where if there are thoughts, we don't notice them. But most of the time, our mind is very active, right? It's those neurons are firing thousands of times a second or something, right? But we often need a different philosophy as to where we even think those thoughts come from, right? What if half the thoughts I have aren't even mine? What if I'm tapping into a collective consciousness? What if as I walk down the street, maybe 90% of the thoughts aren't even mine? Imagine this, right? We do all this work and we meditate and we do all this work to clear our mind, and it's one of the challenges I think sometimes when we take a practice out of context, right? And we just say learn to meditate. Not that I'm saying we shouldn't meditate, we should. But I think along with that must come a shift of philosophy. Like we have to look at the whole picture, right? So if I'm going to clear my mind, perhaps I also need to adopt a philosophy that says many of the thoughts that go through my mind aren't mine at all. Maybe I grab onto the ones that resonate. Maybe I grab onto the ones that are important for me right now, but they're not mine. And then all of a sudden, if someone's reading my mind and they're like, oh, I can't believe you're thinking that, I can easily look at them and say, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just an excellent receiver. But we have to have that lightness about it, or else we'll never be able to open our minds, right? We need a philosophy that says, I'm not attached to having perfect thoughts. I'm not attached to sounding enlightened. I'm not attached to sounding healed and whole and intelligent. I'm just me. And sometimes I'm crazy. And sometimes I'm really sad. And sometimes, like 2 days ago, I have a habit of having migraines if I overthink things too much. And then my whole system goes out of whack and my digestion goes, and I'm just like, oh, and I have to sit back and go, what are you chewing on? But it's just what it is. Most of my friends are pretty intuitive, and again, not that that's, I don't mean that in some kind of weird way, but I actually want them to read me. If I start to really chew like that, if I really start to kind of go, wow, what's going on in my head, First of all, I actually check in with them. And this is one point I'm going to make in a minute, but we'll talk about it now for a second. Being empathic, being telepathic, or even simply, if we call it opening to this different way of receiving information, right? We're certainly transmitting as well, But I think the challenge in what we're really talking about today is the receiving part of it. Sometimes we're receiving things that we don't understand. And that's why it's very important to still be connected into the community in some way. When we have this ability, it's very easy to wall off and disappear and just go, you know what, I'm just going to stay in my house and I'm not going to listen to the news and I'm not going to talk to anybody. I just want the voices to stop, right? And I fully understand that. The challenge is, if we don't know what's going on in the world, we may be picking up on something that has nothing to do with us, and we're going to make it about us. So for example, on the day that 9/11 happened, my kids were very small. We were on the farm. And we were just walking out the lane to get the mail. And we're just walking out there, and I guess my kids would have been 6 and 4. And we're walking out, and all of a sudden, it was like a knife stabbed into my stomach, and I fell down onto the ground. And I literally was on my hands and knees, and I had no idea whether I'd had a gallbladder. I don't know what had happened. It was just, I didn't think that actually. It was just so painful. And, my kids were, I was just like, I don't know what's wrong. So I kind of crawled back into the house, I turned the TV on for my kids to just, because I couldn't care for them. And I turned the TV on and I crawled into the tub and I just laid there in absolute agony, physical agony. And then my son walks into the bathroom and says, Mommy, he said, there's nothing on TV. There's just these planes that are crashing into these towers. And instantly, all the pain went away. I don't understand why that happened, but what I do know is it's important sometimes to know what's going on in the world around us, because what we're feeling may not be ours. So it's just a fine balance between having the solitude that we need to have silence and peace sometimes within in this world. I don't believe it will always be like that. But we also need to have some connections out into the world somehow. So this is normally the first thing I do. If I start to really migraine out, if I really start to go sideways inside, I'll call a friend and I'll say, is anything weird happening in the world? Like, is this me? And inevitably they might say, yeah, I'm feeling a bit off today too. And a little part of me goes, oh good, okay, it's not just me. Or they'll say, no, I'm good. I haven't heard anything weird in the world going on. And I'm like, okay, this is me. I'm chewing on something. This is my stuff. So it's really good to kind of discern that. Non-judgment is so interesting. My teacher, he used to say, so one of the things that happened to him is, it's so funny. I feel like when I used to teach classes live all the time, I would always tell stories and I would retell stories all the time. And it was always funny because people would come back, they would take yoga with me, they would take meditation, they would take other spiritual classes or Tantra with me. And I would inevitably be telling some story. And if I didn't tell it exactly how I told it before, someone's like, no, it was this other thing. Or, and it's so lovely because I actually feel like that now. I'm like, okay, I know you guys have heard this story before. But so when my teacher, the reason he became like that was he was electrocuted. I think he was always maybe a little different, but he was electrocuted in 1987. He was carrying an extension ladder and he hit an overhead wire and he died. And when he came back, all of these channels we're talking about just got busted wide open, almost to the point that I don't even think he could turn them off. It just was, the lights were all on. And one of the things that happened during that near-death experience is he had memory of all of his lifetimes, which is, I think, how he explained as well, is why he was so open to everyone without judgment. Because his favorite, and if you imagine for a moment that there is no such thing as time, so every past life, future life, however you understand that, is all happening right now. So all the lives he's conscious of are actually existing within him at this moment, which is probably the reason we don't have memories of these things, because that's a lot for any consciousness to handle. It's enough to figure out this incarnation, let alone having, 12 or 20 or 100 happening at the same time. Anyway, his favorite one was this guy who was actually an assassin, and he was a real jerk. Like, he was a very angry person. And so here's this assassin in my teacher's consciousness, and he would be like, you can really tell me anything. Because there's nothing bad enough in your story that's worse than what I'm hearing right now. So non-judgment's a really big deal. The second part of allowing ourselves to really be open to this is also having full respect for each other's journeys. And this, of course, comes out of non-judgment. This is like the foundation of all connection. It's the foundation of love. It's what the ancient Greeks would call agape. It's complete non-judgment, total kindness, full respect for each other. Understanding that every single one of us is equal. Every single one of us is on a journey, and we're each on our individual soul's path, and that every single step of our journey is right. And that no one else in the sandbox has any idea what's right for this person. Only this person does. Only this person has that divine connection, that divine guidance. And that's their journey, right? And we've all had times that we ended up in the woods, right? Sometimes, we listen and things just are miraculous. And there's other times that we don't listen and we learn lessons instead. But they're important. Everything's important. All grist for the mill, as my friend used to say, right? So this respect for each other, again, obviously comes into this non-judgment that says, if I feel something from you, or if I hear something from you, why would I judge it? It's awesome. Wherever you're at is perfect. And that means even if you're suffering, even if you're hurting, even if you're repeating a million patterns that I can see as clear as day from my simplified version of your life. That's what we like to do. We like to simplify other people's stories. Because we all know that if we look into our own story, we're so much more complicated than that. We're so much more expansive and multidimensional, and whatever experience we're having right now is deeper than anything we can even describe to a friend. And I think giving that kind of respect to each other is really, really important. So then all of a sudden, let's say you are a blank slate for this person, right? Let's say you can do the whole, I'm just listening, I'm just here for you. And they're saying something and they're crying or they're talking, whatever, and a thought runs through your mind. And you say, are you afraid of this? And they go, yes, I think that's what it really is. And I say that because I don't believe in developing telepathy or empathy or anything like this for any reason other than helping each other in a very natural, organic, living thing. Like, it's never about, I would never want to say teach a course about how to be a telepath. Again, I don't even know if that's the right noun for that, but how to be telepathic so that we can have, seer's abilities or something like that. Like, I don't think it's ever about ego. I think it's about being human about living in the village, just being part of life. And in that way, we have nothing attached to our ability of being telepathic or empathic. It's just who we are. It's who we all are, right? So one of the big things in the land of really honoring each other's journeys, and especially being empathic, is we have to be comfortable with all emotions. And of course, this is our own personal journey, right? So after, when I first met my teacher, I actually met him because he was helping us. He was an organic farmer, and he was helping us transition our farm to organic. And then it was later, when I became sick and I had breast lumps, that I discovered that he actually also did healing work with people. And so I worked with him. We had a miraculous healing. It's in my first book. What if you could skip the cancer? But God knows, if you come to a lot of my classes here, you're probably going to hear all the stories from the book anyway. Afterwards, after I was healed, the lumps came right out the side of my breast. Like, I had this miraculous healing. It was a lot longer process than that. But so I called him one day and I said, Jim, I want to learn what you do. You know, just a little note that's not important to our talk. But see how I did this? My daughter was over yesterday, who's 23, and we were laughing about the differences between the generations. And she was saying that, for example, her generation and younger, when they say, I'm going to call you, they'll go like this. It's not important. I just thought I'd... Anyway. And so I called Jim. And I said, Jim, I want to learn what you do. I want to heal people like you do. I want to help others. And he said, we're not allowed to swear on Insight Timer, but he swore. And he said, why would you want to do that? And he said, why would you ever want to learn what I do? And I thought, what? I said, why wouldn't I want to learn? Like, isn't this, in my brain, I'm like, isn't this the most altruistic thing, to become a healer, to help people, to, like, what's he talking about? And he said, Katrina, I think you really better go away and think about this. And so I went away and I thought about it. And what I realized is I wanted to be a healer because I was uncomfortable with the unhappiness in other people. I wanted everyone to be happy. And I had to really think about that, because I really respect Jim. Like, if he's going to throw me back into my corner, this is important. And this is where it's so important for us to be comfortable with our own emotions. That if I'm unhappy, if I dive in, because we all do it. Like, when I was 20, I was working for the Toronto City Hall in IT. I was a computer programmer. And I really believed in my brain. I was a student. I was a computer programmer. I really believed my brain could really create the perfect life. And out of nowhere, like, I was just a co-op student going to school, my boss took me aside and he says, Katrina, let me take you out for lunch. And I was like, okay. So we go out for lunch. And I mean, out of nowhere, I don't think I'd ever had a conversation with this guy outside of, what project are we working on and what program language are we using? Like, I don't think we'd ever had a personal conversation. And he looks at me and he says, you know what your problem is? He says, your goal in life is to have your emotions like this. He said, you don't ever want to feel sad. And he says, but you know what your problem is? If you never feel sad, you're never going to be really happy either. Like, I don't know where this guy came from. I don't know where this message, well, I guess I do. I know where the message came from. But at the time, I was 20. All I knew was, Why is this guy saying this? But that really planted a seed inside of me that I realized that I really was aiming for this life of almost non-emotionality, that I wanted to be the Buddha. I wanted to just, everything just flows through me. I am unaffected, you know. And so this is my context for saying we all crash, right? We all go through times of real difficulty and sadness and disappointment, especially if we let our brains off the hook for a while and actually let ourselves feel the truth of what we're feeling, right? Like sometimes this leads into another bit that I want to talk about truth, because we have to live in truth. If we want to be telepathic, if we want to be empathic, we have to, our North Star, our guiding light, our basis for understanding the world has to be truth. And the place we start is making sure that we are actually living our own truth, that we are actually being honest with ourselves. So let's say, for example, like when I was sick, part of what I had to get over, what I had to really learn, was I was actually very sad and I was very depressed. And I didn't know how to change anything, and I didn't know how to, I had everything that my brain said I should. I had a husband who loved me, I had children, I had a roof over my head, I had an education, I had what can possibly be wrong here? But I wasn't being honest with myself. I was actually really sad and I was really depressed. When we actually allow ourselves to follow our truth, it means we allow ourselves to go down and up and down and up, right? It's okay. It's like that sine wave. They say that all of the world, all of the motion in the world, all follows a sine wave. Even our voice, everything is a sine wave. Well, what if we just allowed our emotions also to be a sine wave? Right? And maybe sometimes we're in times of great expansion, and then we go into times of contraction, and times of expansion, and times of happiness, and times of, what if it's all good? What if there's no judgment on emotion? So all of a sudden, when you're sitting with someone who's hurting, really hurting, they could be grieving a person, a life, a job, whatever. They could be sad, they could be frustrated, they could be angry. Can you just sit with them? Can we just sit with them and let them feel it? And it's okay. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. We've all been there. It's good, right? And when we can just allow people to feel what they feel, we also empower them in a way that we say, hey, I want you to feel everything you want. I'm right here. And I know you'll figure it out. I know that you have to be here for some reason. I know you have to experience this for some reason. And, it's all good. If we can't do that for ourselves, what would it be like walking through the world? Imagine if I said to myself, I don't like shame. Nobody likes shame. I don't like the fact that I feel guilty. I don't like the fact that I'm afraid of things. I don't like the fact that I have moments of extreme self-righteousness. That's my emotion. I like to go into self-righteousness. We all have those places that we go when we're down, right? Can you imagine walking through the world with this beautiful, open, empathic heart and a clear mind open for telepathic transmission, but we're not comfortable with all the emotions except for happy? We'll go crazy. So a huge part is just actually being honest with ourselves and allowing ourselves without judgment to feel whatever our truth is in this moment. And then all of a sudden, everyone around us is free to feel whatever they feel in this moment. And it's way easier. You know, I'm not saying it's always easy. And this is one thing I want to talk about being an empath, is that I believe that in the world where being a full empath and a full telepathic person, I'm going to look that up later. I don't think we live in fear in that world. I don't think we walk around afraid of everything. You know, I think it's important to be afraid of crocodiles and hot burners and walking in traffic and stuff, all, you know, all the old ones. But I believe that most of the fears that are put into us are artificial. They're put into us maybe from our parents, from society, fears of abandonment, fears of being alone. I think we live in a strange world where we isolate ourselves. You know, we first start in a nuclear family and we sort of disconnect from community. And then if we don't have a nuclear family, we just live alone and we just are isolated. And I think all of this sort of creates a lot of weird fears where if we just lived in community, we would have this constant mirroring and interaction, which would be different. Again, it's a different world, but I believe it's where we thrive. I think there's a lot of false fears put into us from advertising. You know, I was first trained, my first degree is in mathematics. And then after I wrote What If You Could Skip the Cancer, people started coming to me for counseling because they maybe had cancer or they had people in their life who were sick and they wanted help. And I realized that my math degree wasn't going to go very far as a counselor. So I thought I should go back to school and study psychology. So I went back to the same university that I'd studied in and I studied psychology for a couple of years. But I didn't last because one, I didn't like the way they were teaching. There's a lot of reasons I didn't last, but they don't like integrating spirituality into healing, which sort of cuts out a lot of what I'm interested in. That was probably the foundation. But one of the things that really hit me was they were talking about psychological experiments and how 70% of psychological experiments were done by marketing companies and for marketing purposes. And that knocked me out. Like, I just thought, what? Like, you're studying us to find out how to make us buy things we don't want? Right? Like, if you need bread, you're just going to go buy bread. If you need a new roof for your house, you're going to go and get a new roof. So the only reason they would have to do psychological experiments for marketing purposes was to make you buy things you don't need. And of course they learned, and you'll even hear it today in marketing, you have to really present things to people's pain points. Where are the places they're vulnerable? You know, really go after that. So all of a sudden we have all this weird subliminal messaging saying, if you're not fit, if you don't join our gym, you're going to be alone. If you don't get plastic surgery, you're not going to be beautiful. If you don't do this, if you don't have the big car, you won't be perceived as successful. And so again, in this weird world we live in, there's a lot of that in our minds. And so there's all these weird fears, like even in school, even the way our schooling is designed, that this person, so for me, for example, school was easy for me because the people who created the education system think like me, right? That's it. That's the only reason I'm an A student, because other people who think like me made the school. But my son, for example, didn't do well in school at all. He really, really struggled. Well, if everybody who had a mind, because he's brilliant, he's fantastic, if they all thought like him and they created the school system, I probably wouldn't be an A student, right? So we have this weird thing. We have all these judgments and all these things in our head that create all these fears that, oh, I'm a loser, I'm not intelligent, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'll always be alone. Like, these aren't real fears. These are artificial fears placed within us. And then we have all this emotional response to it. And then our brain gets in there and tells stories about us, how it's never going to be any different. And then we feel sad, and then we are frustrated, and then we're angry. So when we walk down the street and you walk by people, the chances are that the emotions you're picking up off of them aren't even real. They're all secondary emotions flying off of these stories from all of these fears that, who knows, maybe they're even generational, maybe they're ancestral, maybe they have nothing to do with this person right now. So the key for us walking in the world, because the world needs us, we need to be out there. It's no good for us to be hiding, because this is an important part of being human. The first step is, again, this truth within ourselves. When we're really honest and we say, wait a minute, is this even mine? Is this really what's going on right now? Why did my brain start going into that place? And again, this is one of the beautiful things about meditation, that it actually lets us find our center. And it lets us sort out all the things that, who was it? Paulo Coelho in The Alchemist or something, when he talked about the difference between being self and other, and to be really clear what is self and what is other. This is really, really important. If we're going to open ourselves up for nonverbal communication, if we're going to open ourselves up in total truth and love, we need to be really clear of what's self and what's other. And it's beautiful. I mean, that's why our journey is always our own, right? And the clearer we become, the more effortless it is to be telepathic, to be out there in the world. And even if you imagine if we want to be kind in the world, all of the things we're talking about, non-judgment, kindness, truth, allowing all the emotions, total respect. It sounds so cliche, but it really starts with us. When I can really look at my life and say, with total respect, it has been quite a journey. You know, maybe I could have made some different choices, but I had to do, that's what I did. That's what made me who I am today. And when I can be completely kind and completely loving and completely not trying to fix me, because that's another big thing, especially when we have this ability, to feel other people's emotions, and we're uncomfortable with uncomfortable emotions. We want to fix people, and we want to, there's nothing wrong with being healers, but we want to fix everybody. And that's a really weird thing. I have it 100%. Like, I'm not, it's been one of my great struggles in life, is this savior archetype, messiah complex stuff, that if I go out in the world and I feel someone sad, then I have to help them. And there's a weird mix in there. It's like a half-truth we've been taught about, like, even karma yoga. Karma yoga is all yoga is about connecting you with the divine. It doesn't matter what kind of yoga you do. Hatha yoga, for example, is through the body, and it's not just postures, it's diet and everything. Karma yoga is about connecting with God through service to others. But it's not about going out and helping people who aren't asking. It's about going out and helping those in need who are asking. It's always about, someone has to ask. And so this is one piece I really want to talk about in this world that we're in right now. We understand in the world where we get to be open and clear and just 100% empathic, telepathic, communicate it through our emotions. I am an open book. In that world, we know what that would feel like. It's lovely. In the world we're in right now, in 2021, we have to be aware, and we have to be almost responsible in a different way. And one of the big things is allowing people's privacy. And we have to learn how to allow our antenna go up when we're asked, and allow it to come back down when we're not asked. Because right now, I think people are very good at shielding their thoughts, which is why telepathy is uncommon, or the telepathic experience is uncommon, except between people who feel very open and unjudged. Empathic communication is rampant and out of control. Like, out of control. Because we have buried our emotions, and because people have said, maybe not us, maybe us, but because we have buried, we don't want to be aware of our shame. We don't want to be aware of our sadness. We don't want to be aware that we hate our life, or we don't like our partner, or we wish things were different. We don't want to admit it, so we bury it. It goes out of our consciousness, and now it's rolling around in our unconscious, trying to escape. So you walk down the street, and it's literally everyone's basements with all the emotions they're repressing are all like seeping out of the tiles. And that's really uncomfortable, right? So it's just as well to just allow them their privacy. You know, we all have those times that we're a little out of control, or maybe we can't control our emotions, or we're really overwhelmed. And people have been overwhelmed for a long, long time. So it is really important for us to pull in those antennae and just let people be themselves, let them feel whatever they're feeling. It's really none of our business. The telepathing thing is also interesting, because that permission is really important. I used to have this curious experience when I started dating. Until I was single, I had never had to look at this telepathic thing very seriously, because I'd been married for 20 years. My kids were accustomed to me kind of reading their minds, not imposing, but if they were upset, we would go and we would sit on the couch, and I would be like, what's going on? And no, I don't know. And these are some of the bonuses, the reasons we're empathic and telepathic. Because in kindness, that we actually get to help someone who can't verbalize what's going on, and maybe can't actually look at what's going on. And so I would say, we would sit there and I'd say, is it this? Is it that? Yeah, it's that. That's what's going on. So it was helpful. It was helpful to be able to do that, right? When I was teaching classes, if I was teaching yoga or meditation, I would trust that whatever I was meant to say, I would just say. It was part of what I did. If I was asked to speak to a group, if I was asked to do counseling, individual intuitive counseling with someone, if they asked me a question, I would answer however it came. So I hadn't actually distinguished it outside of who I was, or I'd never really thought about it. It's just how I was. And then I started dating after we divorced. I started dating, and we would have I would be with this man, and we'd have this lovely time together, and like this beautiful merging, and we'd be lying there afterwards, and something would come out of my mouth, which of course I shouldn't have known. And I had more than a few guys say, how the fuck would you know that? Why would you say that? And it wasn't mean or anything. It just, they hadn't offered that information. And I didn't understand that I actually had gotten in somewhere where I shouldn't have. We weren't long-term dating or in a relationship. it was just early and they weren't ready to be that open. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't understand, because that's just how I always communicated. Until I watched the movie Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by J.K. Rowling. And there's this great scene where one of the witches in it, she is telepathic. And so she's reading the muggle's mind, and she's reading everyone's mind. And and I'm just watching going, And it was interesting because I've been having all these problems with these dates. And my daughter was with me, and she, of course, had heard all about it. And I was sitting there and watching this movie, and suddenly the muggle guy, he actually looks at her and says, "Please stop reading my mind. I didn't ask you to." And that was like a knife through my heart. And I realized what I was doing. And I realized I had to be even more careful. Because unless someone asks, it isn't for us to know. It's not for us to record in our mind. It's not for us to fix. It's not for us to feel. And that really simplified things for me. That I was allowed to just intuit when it was time and when I was asked. To the point that even if I'm doing a counseling session with someone, I won't even tell you unless you ask me a question. You have to ask, or else I won't even know what to say necessarily. So, I'm going to just look at the comments for a minute because we're just over an hour. These hours just disappear on us. I can't speak directly to schizophrenia because I have no personal experience. So everything I'm saying is just what I feel right now, or But one of the things I did want to talk about, which I didn't talk about, which that reminds me, is there's something about being grounded on the earth. There's something about having practice, because when we are very active up here, however we understand it, it's so easy to lose connection with what's real. It's so easy to lose connection with Okay, I'm going to tell a story, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that I may say this wrong, and I don't want to. When I watched the movie A Beautiful Mind, it's a movie about a mathematician who finds out that he's diagnosed schizophrenic. And he goes through all of this horrible treatment and things. And it's a beautiful movie, but it's very challenging. But at the end of the movie, one of the things that came up for him was that he had actually created worlds that didn't exist, and he had sort of imposed worlds on the people around him. And it really blew my mind, like to the point that I actually couldn't speak for about 3 days after I watched this movie. Because I really asked myself, do I do that? Have I actually created a world around me that isn't real? Have I actually created a version of my husband that he's supposed to live up to, but it's not actually the person I'm married to? Have I created a version of my parents that I wish they should have been, and then they just, or my in-laws or my children or me? Have I created a version of that? And because this was sort of part of the movie, which I don't want to compare movies with reality, and it was really interesting to me, and I'm I'm very sensitive to the idea that at the end of the movie, he actually realized that he couldn't quite trust what he saw anymore. And so he would ask a student, like someone appeared in the doorway, and he asked the student beside him, "Do you see that person?" And the student said, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, good." And he was actually going through this journey of sorting out what was real and what was in his mind. And the truth is, I think we all are going through this on some level. I think it's a continuum. But even as empaths, as telepathic people, as people who see things that aren't there, who hear things that other people don't hear, there is a sense of going, even within us, what's real, what's not real. And for me, a huge part is going into nature, really touching the earth, really grounding in the world that isn't all out there, and even grounding with people around me. So like for me, I honestly do check in with people. I'll check in with my kids and I'll say, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Is this rational? Like I do this all the time because I have a really, really active mind, and I experience things that other people don't experience, and I feel things that feel strange sometimes. So there really is something about staying connected and finding people we trust, that we can ground our reality in, and not to dissuade, not to say that it's not real. Like I have so many friends who see spirits and see auras. I don't see anything like that. I'm not clairvoyant in any way. But if they see it, I trust them. Right? The other question that I read quickly was, can you feel telepathy online? 100%. Like, it's even right now, as we're having this class or this talk, it seems silly to imagine that I can feel you, that it feels like I'm actually teaching an in-person class. It doesn't feel like I'm just talking to a computer. It feels like we're all actually in a room together. You know, what's that all about? And the idea that when we expand into this other world, this non-physical world, the world that can't be explained by our five senses, or even our English language, or maybe any language, we start heading into interesting places like what's real? Is there even such thing as time and space? Well, if I'm telepathic, whether you're sitting here with me right in this room, or you're 100 miles from me, what difference does it make? You know, it's, how can that distance matter if if you're 5 feet from me, or 50 feet from me, or 5,000 kilometers from me? I don't think telepathy and empathy understands what time and space is. So I think 100% you can feel it online. You can feel it at a distance, you know. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining. I feel like we'll be talking more about this. It's very, very timely. I think we're all expanding into different things. And it's an interesting balance between, like Melissa was saying, of pulling the antenna in and actually really feeling our truth, really feeling what our baseline is. Like, we have to have a healthy baseline. We have to be able to say, this is my truth, and then go out into the world and almost feel our way out there. And I do want to say that right now things are really odd in the world. And so as an empath, and I'm saying this to you from a very personal perspective, because like 4 days ago, I woke up and it was like I woke up in a pool of water that I didn't recognize. Whatever the water was that I was swimming in before, it felt different. Something was different in the world. And then instantly I called my friends. What do you feel? Do you feel weird? Do you feel like something? So as much as we're empathically connecting with each other as people, telepathically connecting, opening ourselves up, really becoming fully human, we are also part of the world and part of Mother Earth, and we're part of everything around us. So I think it's a time to be very gentle with ourselves. and really ask questions, because telepathy, sorry, apparently I've been talking for an hour, so just a sec. Oops, sorry. Telepathy and empathy and intuition and connection is for us too. It's for our guidance as well. And so in these times, it's so important to really find our center and really go, me or other? I think it's other. Or maybe it's me. Okay, I have a journey to take. Okay, here we go, right? It's a very potent time right now. Lots of things changing. So thank you. You guys are awesome. Apparently I need to drink some water. So we'll see you again. And thank you so much for being here. Book title, I know, but I'm not sure how. That's exactly it. It's so good. Open to mystery. I'm happy to be the vessel. I won't ask why. We'll see you soon.